Good morning. My name is Charlotte Ashamu, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm serving as the curator of the Talks program this year. The Talks programs are one of my favorite places to be during an art fair. It's where I come for some inspiration, and I always leave with making a new connection. And in fact, some of the connections I've made at art fairs are going to be speakers in this program today. So today with us, we have two amazing artists who are based in South Africa, Bronwyn Katz and Igshaan. They're luminaries and visionaries and thought leaders. And with us, we also have Siddhartha Mitter, who is our moderator. He's an art critic, writer, and journalist, brother, friend, and last but not least, a lover of all things okra, if you've ever seen him eat this food. We're going to need a separate talk for him to tell us about that. So put your hands together, please welcome our speakers.
You started us early. I don't think it's even 11:30 yet, but we're going to get a jump on things. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. How's your art fair weekend going so far? Tired? Everybody have their coffee? Yeah, okay. Is the sound good? Yes. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, it's really a pleasure to be here with two artists whom I at this point consider friends and inspiration. In this game, we meet a lot of brilliant artists, but every once in a while, we're fortunate to walk into an exhibition or see a work for the first time and just know immediately that something really important, beautiful, powerful, thoughtful is going on in it. And really the first time that I encountered Bronwyn's work a few years ago, and the first time that I encountered Igshaan's work a few years ago, where each of those were its own kind of separate but very real epiphany. And so such a pleasure after that, not only to have the chance to spend time with each of them, but then also to realize that they happen to be friends to begin with. So we should have a very lovely energy here. For this talk, we thought we would, just to give you a little bit of a run of show, where did I find the piece? We were going to talk a little bit about the material and formal aspects of the work and making it, particularly here in the context of Cape Town. We are going to talk a little bit about what each of these brilliant artists is up to at the moment, these days. But before we do that, by way of introduction, instead of doing biographies and so forth, we thought we would just start with an image and speak off of those images. And so I think we're going to start with, if you'll, Mia, if you'll give us the first image. I asked each of these artists to basically do show and tell, to say, I'd like you to bring in an image and talk about it, and that will be our icebreaker. So Igshaan, we have a monitor here. Why don't you tell us what you chose, what we're looking at, and why?
Okay. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Well, this is an image of an exhibition I had at the Art Institute of Chicago last year. I guess I would consider it a bit of a survey show. It was a look back on 7 years of my practice, and so we pulled from these different eras. The reason why I chose this image, I think, because this exhibition we curated between, the idea was really about a certain period in this rose. As you can see at the back, there's a rose there, and the rose was a plant I grew at home during lockdown, actually. I photographed it at different points of its life, so as it's opening up, as in this case. And the second rose, right on the opposite end of the space, was in full bloom, where it at the point where it started kind of withering. And I guess the entire exhibition was kind of about this period in the rose's life, which I would then say I co-opted and tried to speak about a certain period in my own life, kind of sketching it out through these different works at different times. So it became a reflective exhibition and looking back at how I got here, really.
For those, I imagine that many or most people in the room have some familiarity with your practice, but for those who might not, can you just describe what we are looking at actually materially?
Sure.
What are these things?
Okay, well, on the floor you see a woven tapestry. The material would be a mix of different fabrics, all kind of details and materials that one would associate with a home or domestic space, but also maybe the elements that one would decorate your own body with. I think the image itself is a desire line or a pathway. And I use Google Earth to find these desire lines or these pathways that are created out in open fields by a community of people. In my case, the community of Bonteheuwel that I am from. And, you know, the desire line, of course, for me has to do with crossing boundaries or continually crossing these boundaries that had been put in place years ago that still seem to be so effective. And so I was always finding these pathways that crosses these boundaries. I superimposed another idea over the idea of the desire lines, which would be these sculptural forms that you see hovering above the woven surface. And that the reference I used there was this dance, the real dance, that is an indigenous dance. And in this dance, people would kick the ground in a way that it produces these clouds of dust as the figures move around it. And it's the memory of those dances that I would have witnessed in my earlier life that I referenced for this installation. And of course, the tone, this red earth, also speaks to a certain location where the earth has this red tone to it.
So in each of these instances, we're talking about the action of humans on the earth, right?
Yes.
Through the dance, and then the desire line. Does everybody get the sense of the desire line, what it is, right? So if you're going through a field and then you notice that over the years people have taken a shortcut, right? And then that shortcut is, you know, the grass is gone, or you know, and then, but it's never paved, right? It's just a way that things happen. Community spontaneously, right?
Exactly. But look.
And animals.
Of course, yes, that's true.
And animals.
They also produce desire lines, of course, finding the water hole. But what I wanted to say also, underlying all of this, really, there was the idea that if one thinks about it a little, there's, of course, urban planners imagine how one would move through a space on foot, you know, so there's pathways laid out, and these desire lines really just represented people finding their own path, which is an idea I relate to, especially having grown up in the 80s when, you know, being conditioned to believe that there's a certain level, you know, becoming a manager in a store was kind of the highest one could aim for, given my particular racial category. And so these desire lines become a symbol of people just finding their way, you know, a hustler's mentality, if you want to think about it that way. But also what I was really thinking about was producing a work of art that I can transpose these pathways elsewhere, so others get to walk a path that was produced here. Because I really do feel like often this situation is reversed, where we are almost forced to find a path that is, you know, based on Western ideology, Western ideas, you know. So there's yeah.
Let me ask you one more kind of intro question, and then we'll move on to Bronwyn. You talked about how this show, in a way, was sort of a survey, a mini survey of sort of where you are now and how you got here. You talked about growing up in the 80s. You're still a young person.
In between young and old.
In between young and old, yeah, exactly. Well, you know, you'll always be younger than me, so. But does it feel like a journey at this point already? Does it feel like something to kind of take stock of, and how you got here, and what are you doing here, and does it have a bit of that going on?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the question I thought, well, look, there's other artists around me. Of course, we come up with other people around us, and I guess at some point I realized things had gone a little bit better for me than some of my peers. And the question is then why? You know, what did I do differently? Sometimes people come to me for advice, and I say, what I did right, I have no idea, or I can't share that. But definitely, there's been a moment where I feel there's less anxiety, I guess, in terms of having to push and prove myself and kind of, yeah.
Let's have the next image, please, Mia. So, Bronwyn, as I said, you were welcome to start with an image of the work, but it could also be something entirely different. And so tell us what you chose and why.
I chose this image it's a selfie from 2017. And I just imagine that this is the perfect introduction of myself and my work. Because of the absurdity of this image, you know, coming from a place built around a hole in the earth, and surrounded by 4 other holes, and I mean how that shapes the thinking of the occupants. So that's my reason for choosing this image.
Can you tell us where we are for people who don't know or maybe are new to the country?
Yeah, so this is in Kimberley, my place of birth and my place of upbringing. And this is the Kimberley Hole, known as the Big Hole. And what we see at the back is parts of the city. And that's me in the foreground with my pink hair.
And so what does it feel like to, first of all, a place built around something that is called the Big Hole, right? I mean, it's kind of absurd. It's kind of violent also of an idea. How does that identity of that town, that city, that history play out actually just in people's minds in general when you come from Kimberley and then for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, firstly for myself, I lived in contradiction because the philosophies that I grew up with my grandmother, my great-grandmother, both maternal and paternal, was not reflected in the landscape. Earth was something to be cared for. Nobody had diamonds. So this was a diamond mine. Nobody had prized diamonds, but everyone had a prize. Or what people revered were prized gardens and knowledge of herbs and medicine. So there was a lot of contradiction with the landscape. I mean, the area that I grew up in, Greenpoint, which is the first township built in Kimberley, was built on the floors, so the mine dump floors. And this is particularly very hard earth to grow from. A lot of toil to allow the earth to birth. Which I guess was also why there was a lot of reverence given to those who managed to grow gardens. And I mean, of course, now the space has changed a lot. The materialism of the landscape is reflected a lot more in the communities. But there's also, like, on my part, nostalgia for an understanding that my grandmother had, to, see the value in the earth as a site of not extraction but care. And this filters into my work. I think a lot about how to live in better relation with the space, how the spaces we live and reflect us in the sense that how we treat the earth is a reflection of how we treat ourselves and each other.
What is your kind of relationship to Kimberley now? Do you go back a lot? Is family all there? Like how does it play just kind of into the flow of your life as a working artist, traveling, being based in Cape Town and so on?
I mean, Kimberley is the setting of all of my dreams. There's the childhood home, and that's where a lot of my subconscious is grounded in. It's a place of family. It's a place of community. Cape Town is work, but community and home has always been Kimberley. I mean, of course, I've been in Cape Town on and off for 10 years now. Have a very turbulent relationship with the space. Don't completely have the tools to sometimes adequately be here comfortably. And I think for those reasons, I've continually, I'm trying to make this home too, but there's the sense that Kimberley will always be the center, or my center.
We have, we can go to the next few images, Mia. What I propose we do this. We can, for each of these, we have a few images of exhibitions or work in situ by Igshaan and Bronwyn. Maybe for each one, each of you can tell us quickly what we're looking at, and then we can just hold on one of them. We can have a conversation around making in general. So we have a couple from you, Igshaan. Yeah. Can you just tell us where these are?
So this is actually the same exhibition that traveled. The first image was at the Hayward Gallery in London, and this one is at the Kunsthalle Zurich. Again, the show was called Desire Line. The tapestries on the walls are what I would consider domestic maps, or it's based on the linoleum or the very highly patterned floor cover that we use on the flats. I would go into people's homes, specifically in Bonteheuwel, or homes that I would have spent time in at a certain point in my life, and ask them to trace out the pathways that I'd kind of worn over time, really thinking of them as a sort of document, or this document or this encoding of people's very private lives being kind of left in the ground. And then I, of course, then would materially fill in the blanks left behind through footfall, right? So kind of imagine what the missing information would be of those families. I guess there was an idea that attached to that. The idea was always just based on, a little bit similar to what you were picking up on, this difficulty to being in Cape Town. And of course, I'm a Cape Coloured, everywhere I go, I'm a thief. I'm a danger to society naturally just by the way I look. And so at some point, for the most part, yeah, I can deal with it, and it doesn't really get to me. But there was a moment in my life where it really weighed me down, emotionally. I kind of allowed it to kind of sink in a little bit and get frustrated with the idea that no matter how hard you work, no matter how successful you become, no matter what, the world will always kind of remind you that there's less value placed on your life because of how you look. And so I guess the question is, how much do our minds fill in the blanks automatically without even knowing? If I meet someone, I do the same. I meet an older white man, there might be an assumption of wealth or privilege or whatever, not knowing the reality. And I think we all do that to some extent naturally. We fill in the gaps that or the missing information that is not available to us in those moments. This is another Desire Line. This work was shown at Venice. It's quite a large work. It depicts a pathway out in Epping, which is the neighboring industrial space close to Bonteheuwel or on the other side of the station. And it's these paths that I would have walked in my earlier life, or just after high school, looking for jobs, So this is a work I based on the idea of hustling or having to travel on foot long distances in order to kind of find a job or find some income, or to solve an issue for whatever reason. And it also just became about reflecting on what kind of desires we actually walk with. If you are going to be on that journey, walking, looking for something, of course it becomes a reflective moment, and one thinks about the prayers. Sorry, your turn.
No, you can go on.
That's you.
Yeah.
We have, let's. What I like about this, we're able to show a little bit of work, and then we can talk about a few things. So, Bronwyn, will you tell us where we are, what we're looking at here?
Yeah, I love that Igshaan's last word was the praise. It's a good.
Yes.
So this work is, a prayer of sorts. It's titled Khabi. which is a Torah word, which means to spit water from the mouth. This work is a part of a body of, or continuation of a body of work, where I look at language as a tool for healing and for understanding forgotten knowledge. And I mean, this work, the symbols that I created for this work were inspired by a site called Critic, which stands in opposition to the previous image that we looked at, the big hole. So Driekops Eiland is a 2,000-year-old rock engraving site that's by the Red River, also known as the Muddy River. And in times of high rain, the engravings are submerged by the water. In times of drought, you see more and more of the engravings revealed. And I was very, I was taken by the relationship between this inscription in the earth and the water and what this could mean. And the more I thought about it, the more it made sense that these were prayers to the river, ways to appease the river. And I mean, this thought of an element, the earth being something to appease, really stuck with me. So for this work, so what we see around us are copper wire, and I think of these as rain curtains. So I really wanted to create a space of cleansing, so to introduce water to the installation. There was also a sound element to this work. At the time, I'd extracted a tooth, and I was moving salt water in my mouth to heal an infected hole in my mouth. And I decided to share the sound as a way of like the sound being a material for healing in the space. So the rocks are iron ore that I'd inherited from my dad. The crystals that I bought, they are stones that I had picked up during my walks. And something that I should mention about the stones is, I had, without thinking of the space that I'm collecting, I mean, thoughtless action, just picking up stones, and this being a space that I often visit, I've now developed an accountability to that space, and informing the space where the rocks are. So I mean, I think this work is also growing something with material and space. So let's move on to the next image. So this is the work that I showed at the Venice Biennale. It's called Hue Hue, and it's inspired by this river snake that my grandfather told me about. And the river snake has a diamond for an eye. And it was taking a nap by the river, and a man came to it and saw it was asleep and stole this diamond. And when the snake wakes up, it begins to destroy everything around it. I mean, I like this work or this myth for me really captured like the state that we're currently in. So the materials that I used for this was bed springs that I'd rusted, and that will continue to rust. And the skin is made out of pot scours. Like my hope for this work is that eventually the rust will return to the earth and the skin will remain. So in a similar way, of the sculpture eating itself up.
I think we have the next one, Mia, please. Yeah. Here's another dimension of the practice. Yeah.
So this is a video work that I created at Driekoopseiland. So the site that I'd spoken about earlier. And this image was taken. It was a failed video that never worked out, but I have this image of it. And I was just interested in how to read the earth, you know, how do we get information or signs, and of course, like the possibility of tapping into like knowledge that is not like practical or accessible, but somehow genetically, potentially, because of my relationship with the space, is still a part of my unconscious. So yeah, this was me trying to figure out ways to, with the water, read the engravings.
Can we just go back, if you go back to just, maybe let's stay on that because we're sort of in material and form here. So for a couple of minutes now, I'd just like to chat a bit about, but for both of you, the work is obviously very charged with terrain, memory, history, communities, systems of knowledge, and so on, in very beautiful ways. The question then is, when you're in the studio, when you're actually making, finding the language, right? Finding the visual language, the material language, the formal aspect of it, even the part of beauty, right? The part of aesthetics. I wonder if you could share, you know, with respect to your own work, you even speaking to each other's work, a little bit of what are some of the key stages that you went through, or key processes or moments that you went through that helped you find an artistic language for these memories, these ideas, these systems of knowledge? Sure. And yeah, either of you, we can keep this very open now. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Materially, well, I guess. Look, I've been doing this for a long time. I mean, I started after high school. I started out as a painter, so I didn't get much education, I have to be honest. I mean, I spent a few years at Cape College learning more the traditional kind of oil on canvas painting and still lifes, and but I knew I never loved it, you know. I wasn't in love with the process of painting. It was only later on when I got to Ruth Prowse where I was forced to kind of look to the domestic space for material because I didn't have the money for paints and things, and it was my grandmother's clothing and the couch that I cut up and the floors that was available. Whatever material was there, cheap and available, is what I started using and putting these narratives together with thinking about marks left behind or just different textures that kind of reminded me of my own upbringing is where the material started. So I would say in terms of my approach in the studio and putting together materials, that I guess I do start out with a certain kind of sensibility. I know what I'm going to feel when I stand in front of the work before it is made. So I know how I'm going to feel about it and what this thing is going to allow me to feel. And then it's just a process of getting there. And so now I need to find the materials, or this could possibly work, this and this. So I gather quite a bit of different materials and start the process of experimentation until I land on the sensibility, this feeling, this surface that gives me what I want from it. But often, of course, other things happen in the process, and sometimes you have to kind of take a detour and forget about what your intentions were and allow the thing to tell you what it wants. But in other times you push for an agenda, but it all comes together with this experimentation. And then I take this painter's approach. What has been nice being at Zeitz is to be able to see how the technique has changed over the last few years from where we started. And I relate that to painting. You know, if you think about using individual brushstrokes in a painting versus mixing paint on the canvas itself, I think we've kind of moved from the one process to the other, where I would have started out kind of a single line of rope and complete that rope and then take a second piece of rope and add that and kind of build in this way. Now we have multiple different cords and beads and mohair and chain and all of these different materials we are now able to weave together simultaneously to arrive at a new texture, new tones and new colors that we didn't start out with. And it's been really fun to see every stage of that process over the years by looking at my own archive of the failures or the things that has not been successful. And then one last thing I wanted to add about the materials in terms of its meaning for me. I would say the beads has always just been about the individual versus the collective. I feel like the beads, the materials I choose, there's nothing remarkable in and of itself. They're kind of quite unremarkable and cheap and things we're kind of all familiar with. And the challenge then is really just how do you, through intervention and through mashing them up together and matching them with other things, how do you bring out something more? How do you bring value to make it more than what it was ever supposed to be?
Is beauty important?
Absolutely. It's
elegance,
for me,
those things, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, beauty is a good way to. I mean, historically, beauty has always been used in a spiritual sense, in a religious sense, to kind of, in architecture, when one is meant to kind of experience this elevation of spirit as you walk into the space. I think beauty is a good way to kind of feel that.
What about you, Bronwyn? Finding the language, finding the formal direction.
I think what Igshaan and I share is this idea of the experiment, or I'd call it play. Yeah. And I think it involves listening or reading, like material objects, and then like transforming it. So I think that's something that's shared between the two of us. So deep listening to like what you were saying, like what is the history of this thing? And how can I read that information? How can I contribute to it? How can I distort it? My studio practice is a lot more insular. I think of my studio as like a spiritual place, a sacred space, where like I not only transform my materials, but I transform myself as well, and that requires solitude for me. I mean, one material that has been consistent in the work has been, like it's sort of been like the starting point of the work, or me unraveling a language that is not defined yet, but is finding form at the moment, has been the bed springs. And the bed spring started with foam. And complete mistake, like by chance, I was looking for a solution for a sculpture that I'd made out of cement bricks. And I worried that if somebody had stacked bricks, and I'd worried that if somebody were to lean on the bricks, it would fall and hurt someone. And I thought, I need some cushioning for the top. And I didn't have any money, so I bought an old mattress. And I cut it up, and I stuffed so the bricks were covered with soil-stained cloth, and I covered the old bed with a soil-stained cloth, and it didn't work as a solution because they were flimsy and they kept on falling.
Yes.
So I had all of this pieces of mattress in my studio, and just lived with it for a bit, and then thought this was somebody's bed, and I just cut it up, and I didn't even think about it. And then I really wanted to put it back together. So I started stitching it up with wire. And that was my first bed sculpture or mattress sculpture. And then people just started giving me mattresses and beds. And at first
As one does, yeah.
And at first I was committed to the foam, and then I had all of these springs in my studio, and then I decided to take it apart, to see what this thing is made out of, and over time, having spent time with the material, like reflecting on it as I mean, it's so much happens on a bed. It's a space of birth, sex, death, and I mean, I think in like the earlier works, I was reflecting a lot on, I mean, the earth being, in my community in Kimberley, people would be, if somebody had passed away, you'd be like, they're under the soil blanket, you know? So there's this clear reference to the bed and the earth. And I mean, as I've sort of moved into stones, which, I mean, originally the mattress was a solution to stone. And now I'm finding my way back to stone. So I think there's also a conversation between, I mean, also, I've always thought of the springs as metal because of its materiality, because it's something that can rust. So I'm going in a circle now. I'm just going to stop there.
You know, as we've seen here, both of you had work in the last year's Venice Biennale, which I think was an inspired choice by Cecilia Alemani, the curator. And so, you know, one could say, you know, wow, you know, Venice, it isn't the be all and end all, but it is a pretty big deal. And, you know, we could say, okay, here are these two kind of like, you know, working class colored kids from South Africa who are in the Venice Biennale. We could talk about all those sorts of things. But what I was actually curious about, just seeing, for example, how that was staged, right? And then your work, and Amy Silman, the painter Amy Silman, had works around. And then you were in the Arsenale, and there were other works around. And the Venice Biennale is an old institution, right? It's 100 and whatever it is, numbers of years old. And it is a piece of the canon making, right? And art history making, and that system of knowledge. And so I wonder what it's like for each of you to kind of see your own work and your own selves represented in kind of like the art historical context, or in art being made around the world now. Does it kind of alter even your feeling about the work as it is exhibited? Like what's it like basically to be kind of entered into this evolving canon that's being kind of declared by the curatorial world over the years?
Well, I guess I'll start.
Small question.
For me, it comes with a sense of responsibility. I think Bronwyn was talking earlier about how, for her, a sense of sacred space means solitude. For me, it's the opposite. You know, I think from a Sufi point of view, we serve God through serving people, and I think I've taken that quite seriously, and I've created a community around my practice, which involves a lot more people than what you see in the studio. And I speak about that community in the work. I employ that community. The majority of my assistants are from the space where I grew up, and so I feel a great sense of responsibility of representing others, you know, where I'm from, and telling our stories. It's why I invited the dancers that performed last night in the studio and will perform today again, to come and perform in my space. It's about telling the stories of us, who feel overlooked.
Do you feel a relationship to art history, as it were? You know, you didn't go to a fancy art school with all the MFAs and so forth, but here you are, a brilliant artist. But do you feel a relationship to, you know, the history of this thing?
I really don't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's a wonderful answer. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. And Bronwyn, what about you, being in Venice and seeing your work, you know, with Amy's work and so, like, that context?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've had a very short career, but a lot is happening, and I'm learning on the job. And to be completely honest, I didn't understand I don't know, the cult following or the like importance of Venice until I arrived in Venice and my work was there, to be completely honest. And in this, how it's transformed me, or like how it's affected me, is that at least like it's made it very clear to me that like the work is not about showing at the biggest, baddest, most celebrated exhibition. I'm not even, I mean, I'm very happy to share the work with as large audience as possible. But like the work is very much for my community. And I mean, I was a bit depressed after Venice because I thought that being in the show, I'm being maybe too honest, but I don't know, I thought it would fix something, you know, or solve all of my problems. Because this is, I mean, it's what everyone is so excited about this thing. This is a marker of something. And if anything, it's just reaffirmed that it's about the work and like personal healing. Whatever I fulfillment I'm going to find is going to be through the work and not through any show or admiration.
Before we open up to conversation in the room, I asked each of you to share a little bit about something that you are up to now, what's going on for you now. And if we go to the next, there we go. I think we have two of these images. Okay. This is very remarkable. Your studio is now, for a period of time, inside a museum.
It is so unusual. And
as in, museum visitors are walking in and out through your studio all day.
I'll share with you a story. I went to the meeting with Storm and Koyo and everybody from Zeitz with the intention of saying, no, this is not for me. And within 5 minutes, I said yes. But I am so happy I said yes. It's really what Bronwyn was just saying about, we realize that there's, when you're a younger artist, you have all these fantasies and ideas of what will make you successful. But when you get to Venice, you realize it's so meaningless to me in many ways, that really I find so much pleasure being at Zeitz and reaching the audience of Bonteheuwel, of the Cape Flats, of people, a non-art audience. I'm constantly having these conversations around the work, but it's not an art conversation. It's about life. It's about lived experiences. It's about people who, I don't have to start at zero trying to explain everything. What is this linoleum? What does it mean? They get it, and it resonates with them. And we can then kind of pull quickly and have conversations around what's happening in the space. It's really been so meaningful, I have to say. Exhausting and distracting and all of that, but it's been wonderful. So at the moment, what we are working on is, I have been invited to the Sao Paulo Biennial. It's probably the big thing I'm busy with and will keep me busy for a few months. And this will be the largest work I've ever attempted. So 18 meters woven. And the theme or the curatorial statement has to do with choreographing the impossible.
Choreographing the impossible.
Mm-hmm. And so here I'm creating a space, a central space with multiple pathways just leading to the center. And it is based on the real space where I used Google Maps and found this in between Bonteheuwel and its surrounding communities, in this no man's space where people hang out. And so you have these pathways coming from multiple spaces leading to a central point, and this is going to be the basic idea for that installation. Yeah, what else? There's many. I mean, I've been working about 7 projects.
And you have You have a lot of people in the studio, in the museum.
That's my family. That's right. My two aunts and my sister.
Yeah, and as you also said, there are other people who are in the neighborhoods who are also participating in the work and so on.
There's about 6
and the aunties are in the house, and we
they're the commentators. They just sit there and can you see? Look what she's doing now. Look at that. Look at this person. They just comment the whole day about everything they see.
They're aunties. That's part of the job description.
I love it. But they bring a certain vibe. Look, my aunts had a big influence on what I'm doing at the moment. They were both crafters. They were always very creative. And my aunt in the radio, who refuses to age, she's my favorite. But they both of them, they used to. They would always use my grandmother's wedding dress, for instance, and turn it into one thing, and then after a few years it turns into something else. So this kind of attitude to repurposing things or looking at something not for what it is, but what it potentially could be, I think I picked up from them very early on. And they also taught us as little young boys to stitch and crochet and embroider, and so we had the skills early on because we grew up in this home of women. My brother and I, and so I'm really loving that they are in the space. It makes sense for them to be there, and now they do the embroidery. They do a good job.
And you told me that young people are coming on Wednesdays on dates to the museum from the Cape Flats.
This is amazing. This is amazing. Like kids are coming, bringing. I feel like the boys have realized that this is a good way to impress the girls.
The museum, old tactic, famous tactic. Yeah,
I mean, these youngsters on dates, and they're curious and they come and talk to me and ask questions, and this is a little bit more meaningful in some ways than showing at Venice, I would say.
And in the environment of Cape Town and the spatial politics and spatial history of Cape Town is no small thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have 60 kids from Bonteheuwel that we also, for that reason, because it can be so alienating, the waterfront and the museums and galleries, so we expose them. Kids from Bonteheuwel, bring them into the museum, to the water, and give them a sense of ownership of space, which is something I didn't have. I had to teach myself.
And so speaking of waterfronts and water, next slide. Bronwyn, what have you been up to?
Yeah, this is an image from the Keta Lagoon. It's in the Volta region in Ghana. And I recently spent some time, a month, in Anyaku and Accra. Anyaku is Alanatui's home village, and it's bordered by this lagoon. And we've been having conversations about the structures that live in the lagoon, and the possibility of creating structures that interact with the lagoon. He's been sharing about these techniques of collecting fish, and I've been sharing about my work on Riekops Eiland and symbols that engage with water. So that's what I've been up to.
And so you've been spending time with Elanatsui under the Rolex Mentor Protege program, right? And first of all, I think we're all jealous. What extraordinary to be hanging out on the lagoon in Ghana with Elanatsui. And I think maybe this will be the last thing that I ask you all before we open up. We were talking yesterday at coffee about systems of knowledge, right? And when you're with an elder, veteran, extremely important and brilliant artist like Elanatsui, there's the knowledge of that. I mean, kind of the actual mentor of being someone who is so advanced and so brilliant, a senior in the game, right? And then there's also the knowledge of being on water and nature and listening to the land, right? And then when we come back here and to what Igshaan is doing, there's the knowledge system of Cape Town, the Cape Flats, of Montevideo, of all the different kinds of systems of thinking that have converged here for 500 years, right? And indigenous knowledges, Malay and Indonesian knowledges, all these different knowledges that are here in this very charged place with this land, right? I keep thinking of Vasco da Gama, after whom this room, for some reason, is named. I keep thinking that when these guys were floating down around the corner of Africa, wondering where the hell they were going, and when they got to that point where you see Table Mountain there and that vista, it must have blown their minds. I mean, the spiritual charge here. This goes back into geological time, right? And so, in a way, one thing that I see in the work of both of you is really thinking out of all those knowledges at once and maybe putting something back in, right? There's like feeding into a circle of knowledge that is quite different from kind of like, art history. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's has to do with a lot of unlearning of material culture that currently prevails. So maybe like transforming existing knowledge or thinking. There's so much, unfortunately, that's lost to us, so much important knowledge that's lost to us. What's been great about spending time with Al is, I suppose, like his consistent references to his ancestors, and Al's 50 years older than me, but there's always this idea that there's so much to learn from the past, as there's to learn about like water. Lost my train of thought, but it had something to do about learning from each other, learning from nature. I suppose like also as human beings, like we don't know as much as the water. Like there's so much that we've forgotten that the water hasn't forgotten, or that the earth hasn't forgotten, the landscape remembers. So that being a site of relearning.
So in the spirit of unlearning Western chronology, I have absolutely no idea how much time we have left, and it doesn't matter because we're going to talk, and we will get cut off whenever they cut us off. And I know that there is a lot of knowledge and intuition and insight in the room, and so I would love to open up the conversation. Now, do we have a roving mic or okay? Please, your questions and yes, even your comments. In the back there, yeah.
Hi, and thank you so much. Is this working? Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for the insights.
And if you'd like to introduce yourself, only if you'd like to.
Sure. My name is Candice Braitz. And as I was saying, very, very lovely to get some insight into both of your practices after following it without having heard you speak about it. And I was really interested to hear each of you at different moments talking about moments in your practice which you regarded as failures. Because I think one of the most interesting things about working for longer periods of time as an artist is how you develop this internal voice, which of course is completely idiosyncratic. One makes up the rules of one's own practice and sets one's own priorities and challenges as an artist. And I'm always curious to hear other artists speak about how they diagnose, is it a gut feeling when you feel that something's just not working and you don't want to carry on the journey, or do you like sickle the whole way through to the end before you can feel that it's not something that you want to put into the world? Just curious to hear, because I know it's such a subjective and personal thing to be your own your own toughest critic, and in a way one has to be one's own toughest critic. Cool. But I think some of our criteria that we set for ourselves as artists are very opaque to other people, right? It's the voice in our head, so yeah.
Sure. Well, it reminds me of a quote I once heard Anish Kapoor say when he said, you know, make sure you fail often. You know, you have to fail as many times as possible in the studio, but fail quickly. There's no point in failing for years and years, and you know, then realizing it was a waste of time. But no, failures are so important. I mean, it's so important. Honestly, you know, it's really where it's really where new things really have the opportunity to kind of spring out from, I don't know, wherever it comes from.
That's where the learning happens, right?
Absolutely. Well, that's what I was doing at Zeitz now, and I've given myself that opportunity to really look at my own archive of failures for the last 7 to 10 years. And like I said earlier, also just kind of, the first thing we did actually is show them and put them on the walls, these things that I'd been hiding and was so embarrassed to show anyone at the time. Now, it would be no surprise to anybody to know that as an artist, I have a massive ego, right? So there's the idea of wanting to put your best foot forward, always making sure you show the best of all. In fact, for many years in my earlier career, I would make 2 bodies of work and choose one because I had the time to do that back then, or I would make 20 works and choose 10 choose the best in that way, making sure that only the best is ever shown. Now, of course, you make mistakes but at this point, I guess, as a little bit older version of myself, it's been quite liberating, actually, just to claim the fact that I make shit art at times, you know, and that I can show that and live with it and be proud of it, because at this point, of course, you realize it's going to lead somewhere, and that's quite exciting.
Bronwyn, is failure a productive part of your process?
Mistakes are the best parts of the work. It's the best teachers. I'm quite structured, or I try and be structured. I think that's the voice, to try and find order, put things together, and then just something goes wrong, and that's the magic, and that's the exciting thing that I couldn't have thought of. So mistakes are very important to the work. I mean, there is also a push and pull struggle. I remember the first time I tried to do something, because I'd been working with Potskowers, and there was the bass spring, and I was trying to find a way to do something together, and it just wasn't working out, and it bothered me, and I couldn't sleep, and I was in studio trying to figure it out, and then one day, somehow, something clicked, and it was it was the best day. Nothing could go wrong that day. The best feeling I was, So there's the challenge, there's a struggle, and it's a reward. It's rewarding. It's exciting. Yeah.
Let's try to have a few more questions or insights from the room. Yeah.
As long as I'm not treading on any toes, because I don't want to be. Anybody else want to speak before me?
I mean, we can also have 2 or 3 people speak rapidly, just so we have it'd be nice to have a few ideas or thoughts from the room. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
First of all, just gratitude. I feel like my name's Mish Fabreleux, and I'm an artist based in London, in England. We had the privilege of seeing both of your works at the Venice Biennale, so I do exactly understand. They have now really become alive because we've met you. So, of course, these works are kind of, in a way, carcasses, but in the end, they also are filled with the materiality of your healing and your transformation. So, thank you so much. This has been so brilliant to see the work and get more of a biography and a history and meet you both. Thank you so much.
Let's invite a few more thoughts from the room. Don't be shy now. Over here.
I won't be. My name is Lisa. I'm currently studying fashion design. So I just want to know, in terms of your process, if you ever feel like there's some sort of a blockage, what's the best way that you find to overcome it? And like
Physical exhaustion.
Physical exhaustion.
Sleep.
No, I really mean that. I mean that actually there's something about getting your body to be to a point where you're physically exhausted, that there's certain inhibitions keeping you from taking those risks or jumping into it, that you actually become open to ideas that you weren't. I really do believe in that. Like, so I clean my house and then I go back to work.
Any other thoughts from the collective geniuses in this room? So please, yes.
I'm quite curious about the aspect of isolation, because in both of your works, I feel that isolation and aloneness has given fruition to a very authentic, beautifully honest rendering of your lives and your work.
Thank you.
And I'd like to know, because yesterday I was so moved, Ish, by your performance and your work. I have rarely felt that way.
Thank you.
Sure. I mean, I think of the hermit a lot. And I suppose the hermit is, I think of the hermit as the artist, or my version of the artist, you know, and you go inside to confront loneliness, and in that space, you realize how connected you are to everything, you know, and it makes you very sensitive. And I think artists, you need to be sensitive enough to read the world, read yourself, really interrogate yourself. And often, I mean, of course, that after the stage, this needs to be shared with community and everyone else. But that space of aloneness is important to find information. Yeah.
For me, it's a bit different. I find my isolation and solitude at home. I love being home, and I have cats, and I love my plants, and I love being up early in the morning. You know, this is my solitude and my kind of filling myself up, you know, in order to give whatever I want to give away. I really do feel like, as an artist, it is about being generous in terms of giving of yourself, giving of what you've learned or kind of pieced together through this inquiry into self and materials. But for me, I find that I work best with noise, with people and noise, and lots of people around me, and music and different languages being spoken. And amongst the chaos, I seem to have the ability to move inward and then find that quiet space inside. But if I'm alone, it freaks me out in the studio, you know. There are moments, of course, where it's important to be alone in the studio and figure things out for myself, in which case it's easy for me to ask everybody to leave. That, you know, but that's kind of rare. For the most part, I like being amongst chaos. I think it's probably about having been raised in a big family in a small space with always noise and people, and you know, it doesn't matter what's going on around you. You still have to focus and continue and finish what you are busy with. And I do feel like I have that ability.
We are almost perversely on time. It's 12:29. There's still a little window here for any other thoughts or musings from the room. Yes, in the far back there.
Hi, my name is Noncedo, or Veronica, for those who can't handle the first one. I wanted to ask something from the artist. I'm impressed by your work, and I feel it feels like it's spiritual more than being physical. So what I wanted to ask is, can you draw a vision or a dream? You have a dream or a vision, and it's quite clear. You can draw a picture and everything, but you don't know what it means. But do you have have you ever had a moment whereby that attacks you, a dream? You can draw a picture and somebody can come around and even interpret it from your picture. Has that happened in your life as artist? Because
yes.
It feels spiritual more.
So, yes. So the question of visioning and motivation of vision, and I believe there was one person in the far back who wanted to say something, and we'll take that, and then we'll have answers, and then we'll close it up.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm Lungi Morrison. I'm just going to ask a quick question around the role of artists in the arts in kind of a Pan-African agenda. I love the idea. I just was living in Accra myself, and I think aside from geopolitics and all the things we know that's happening in the world, I think that the artist and artwork are an important narrative to remind us that we belong and that we're connected. And I think that artists play a fundamental role at this time. And I'm inspired to hear what your thoughts are in terms of the ease of doing that.
Beautiful. So the question of vision, and then the question of Pan-Africanism. What a beautiful way to close this.
I'll speak about vision. You can take the second one. Well, I mean, yeah, I have to admit that in dreams have always been such a massive part in my spiritual life and how it filters into the work. I remember in the beginning, actually, I showed that work at Stevenson years ago, this installation that I produced with the prayer rugs, which I then depicted a snake inside the prayer rugs, kind of almost swimming in the opposite world. So there was a dream I had about the snake, and it was a recurring dream, so I constantly had the same dream about me and this boy. So the young kid, the first time I had this dream, it was a baby, and he threw something in water, and the snake emerges, and there's these little baby snakes that it takes in its mouth, and it exits the pool, right? So the second time I dream of the snake, it's the boy grows a little bit older, and we're stepping, everywhere we step, we miss the snake. Then continuously, every time I dream about him, he grows a little bit bigger, but I can never face him. It's always just me and him combating the snake. At some point, the snake becomes half snake, half human, and he's throwing boulders at us, and we are constantly defeating. As soon as you kill it, it comes back to life, and it was quite intense. But eventually, we defeated that snake, me and this guy. And in this last dream I had was the night of an opening at Stevenson Gallery of a show called What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. And in this final dream, I dreamt I was in this warehouse, and there was these kids who walked past me in this group of young. I knew in the dream it was my responsibility to make sure that they are fine and taken care of, because they weren't happy kids, I guess. They moved past me, and then as they moved, there was this man that came to me, and we cried, and we hugged each other, and we loved each other, and it was an overwhelming sense of unconditional love, and it was quite amazing and actually life-changing. Even when I woke up, this feeling stayed with me. And I asked the guy, who are you? Who are you? I love you, and I've missed you, but I don't know who you are. And he says, I am you. And I've made many works based on this idea of I am you, this kind of reflection of self that has been incredibly healing and created this entire paradigm shift in how I related to myself. And the grounding that came from that has never kind of left me.
And Bronwyn, to you falls the question of Pan-Africanism and being an African artist.
I think it's. I also want to speak about a dream, just like
Yes,
something
please.
short.
Yes, please.
Like, it's going to be very short,
Just
because it's also about a snake, And I mean, it's what sparked. I mean, what drew me to the idea for the Venice work, and then just, I suppose, other information about the snake as well. But it was a dream with this little girl, peach black in complexion, with a really big head. And she was speaking to me in Setswana. I don't speak Setswana, but in the dream I understood everything she was saying to me. And she walked me down a street and showed me all of these bottles of water and all of these people stuck in these bottles of water. And so it's weird. It's like, I wanted to say it because it's so close to your dream. I know. But moving on, because we don't have time. I think it's really exciting what's happening in Accra with artist-led spaces. I went to Tamale and I saw what Ibrahim Ahama's doing. And I called my mom and I said, okay, we need to look for a piece of land in Kimberley. Because I'd always, my excuse was Kimberley's too hot and it's too dry, and I don't want to be in Kimberley. And then Tamale is warmer, it's hotter, it's drier, there's less going on, it's going in Kimberley. And we went to the space on a Sunday, and the community was in the space, and like the art was for them, and there was an excitement about the art, and there was no barrier. It was Ibrahim in his community, and they were sharing the art with him. And I think like in terms of, I think there's oftentimes a lot of responsibility placed on African artists to do something significant and amazing for everyone else. And I think that's very unfair. It's the choice of the artist and the capacity of the artist. I think artists are very generous people, just often by virtue of being artists. So I think it's important that we learn from each other and fundamentally do what we want to do and what we have the capacity to do.
So as we close, I would be remiss if I did not, first of all, thank Charlotte for organizing the talks program. I know there's two or three more this afternoon. Very, very interesting talks that are lined up, and to thank the fair, Investec Cape Town Art Fair, for having us. I would also be remiss if I did not acknowledge the presence in the room of some of Igshaan's family. Your parents are here. Yeah, so much respect to you. And in a room as in the Vasco da Gama room, I would also like to say, I'd like to acknowledge the ancestral spirits on this land and all who were displaced in more recent decades, and the freedom fighters. And then finally, most of all, such deep thanks to the two of you for your spirit, your generosity, the work that you have made and are continuing to make in all forms, tangible, intangible, the ideas that you've put back in, and your generosity and willingness to share so much with everyone here today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.